I saw the poverty over there in Italy and the way they lived. It's not for me because I was born different. They didn't even have toilet paper back there. They didn't know what wrapping paper was. I wanted to buy a bunch of bananas, and my cousin told me, then don't buy that many. I says, why? She says, well, we could buy a banana and cut it in two and give half to one person, half to another. Well, I said, well, in America, we don't do that. We buy a bunch of them here, 10, 12. In America, you have everything you want.
Whereabouts are you from, then?
Augusta, Catania.
Oh, yeah.
That's about 4 hours away from where your father comes from. Right. Not me. I was born here, though.
Oh, your father.
Right. What do you think I'm an American here?
Mamma, sono tanto felice perché ritorno da te. La mia canzone mi dice che è stato un giorno per te.
Fisherman's Wharf, San Francisco, California.
Vivere lontano perché, mamma, solo per te la mia canzone vola.
This was nothing but Italians here, 90%. This was Italian headquarters here. They used to call it Little Italy.
Bene, queste parole d'amore che mi sospira il mio cuore, forse non si usano più.
Most of the wharf in San Francisco is still worked by the Italians, as it has been since the turn of the century.
My father came over here in 1890. He was married here and divorced in 1900. In 1902, he sent for another wife in Italy to come here and married her. She was a widow. In those days, they used to send photographs from Italy over here, and if the fellow liked the person, he would call for her. If he didn't like the picture, he wouldn't send for her. That's how they did it. Everything was like they had in Italy, that the wagon had come selling potatoes on the street. The bread man would sell you bread from the wagon, and wine and so forth. We made our own wine, and that's how we lived. The same tradition they had in Italy was here. We didn't have much, but whatever we had here was more than they had over there.
Emigration became a part of everyday life in Italy, a fact that was echoed in many popular songs. This one describes the desolation of the countryside as it appears to someone left behind.
Nella campagna non ci sta nessuno.
there, the poverty and the misery that they had was very difficult to live. It was hard to get food, and it was hard to get any fish. They were all fishermen in that little locality there, and they thought there was more of an advantage in this country than there was in that country, and that's what made them come over here.
Io parto per l'America, parto sul bastimento. Io parto e son contento di non vederti più.
Over 4 million Italians poured into the United States between 1880 and 1914. In 1907 alone, over 250,000 arrived. They came to escape slums, bad landlords, corrupt laws, and the sheer poverty of the soil. 1 young Italian in 10 left for the New World.
The desire was to come for 3 or 4 years, save enough money to return to Italy and to buy 3 or 4 acres of land so that we would no longer be dependent on the exploiting landholders. But then, of course, it didn't work out that way. The steamship companies had agents in New York, and we were just simply actually shipped as laborers to New York, and from there distributed all over the country.
Angelo Pellegrini, now a professor of English, was 10 years old when he came to America in 1913. With the rest of his family, he was to join his father, who had already settled on the West Coast. His father was working in a frontier lumber town in the state of Washington, over 3,000 miles from Ellis Island. The family still had in front of them as long a journey as they had already made from Italy.
When we left Ellis Island and went to the railway station to board the train, we were greeted with the news that the place to which we were going, McCleary, Washington, did not exist. Incredible, you see. It was a frontier town, recently established, unincorporated. It wasn't on the maps. It wasn't on the time schedules. There is no such place. Well, Mother would show them the address in Father's beautiful handwriting. McCleary, McCleary, Washington. It's there. You know. So they decided that they would ship us to a central point in the state of Washington. We were tagged. The address was pinned to us, and they shipped us. The journey across the continent took about 7 or 8 days. In crossing the continent, we had glimpses of the promised land. We saw, literally, mountains of apples on the ground, under the trees. Huge mounds of apples, and apparently no one was gathering them. When I saw those and remembered that in Italy, I once was nearly beaten to death by a peasant whose single apple tree I had raided and got just 1 apple, and he chased me and flailed me for 1 lousy apple. I said to myself, ci siamo, we have arrived.
The Pellegrinis did find the town of McCleary and their father, who was working as a lumberjack. With his job went a house and land. To begin with, the New World fulfilled its promise.
Soon we were all at work. Land, we had all that we could till. We didn't have to buy it. A deed meant nothing. I mean, for once, you see, for once in our lives, we knew the extraordinary delight of turning a sod, and every shovelful was a loaf for us.
The people were not so generous. The Italians spoke little English, they had darker skins and Latin ways. All this led to conflicts with the rest of the population.
We were actually the first South Europeans that they had ever seen. These miserable natives, as I called them, because many of them had just come, you know, maybe a generation before we. Maybe they were second generation immigrants, the Norwegians and Irish and Germans. And yet, they soon made us understand that the attitude of the Native American, as we call them, toward us was roughly what the attitude of the American has been toward the blacks. We were forbidden, for example, we young men were forbidden to associate with American girls. And if one ventured to go out with an American girl, number one, she would have to be of a rather poor white trash derivation. Otherwise, she wouldn't be going with him. And then, being such, she would have a brutal brother who would clobber the hell out of this wop who dared.
In 1891, a mob in New Orleans murdered 11 Italians. The chief of police had been assassinated and a number of Italians were brought to trial. They were acquitted, but local people were convinced that the mafia had threatened the jury. They took the law into their own hands, broke into the jailhouse, shot some of the Italians and lynched the rest. All over the country, feeling ran high against Italians. The New York Times said of the incident,
Our own rattlesnakes are as good citizens as they. Our own murderers are men of feeling and nobility compared to them.
The Italians were the most despised of the immigrant groups from Europe. They had to take the worst jobs. They were the rag pickers. They were the shoe shine boys. They were the knife sharpeners. They were the organ grinders. They were peddlers. Some were almost beggars. Some Americans claimed that their country was becoming a dumping ground for Europe's rejects. They saw the Italians as parasites, stealing food from the honest native. It was hardly the welcome of a promised land.
I remember times that my father and mother would sit and watch us, and we'd look at my father and we'd see tears in his eyes. We didn't have what to eat. It was that bad. Okay? So, really, I think he died of a broken heart because of thinking what America held for him, and it was not there. And him feeling that, I believe in my heart, that he was Italian. And in New York at that time, Italians were not accepted as people. And very frankly, people called them non-whites. Wop, Guinea, Dago.
Murderers, criminals. Members of the Black Hand. The Mafia. That was the view of the Italians. The San Francisco Chronicle declared,
"The duty of the United States is clear in this matter. We must lock the gates and shut and bar them in the face of these conspirators and criminals. Send them back as fast as they come. And if Italy does not like it, let her make the best of it."
I grew up in an Italian ghetto, and the bad aspects were that we really were identified as criminals. When I was a child, people believed that all the criminals were Italian. I think the point, however, is that in many ways you would find Italians are pushed into organized crime. Members of minority groups who come to the United States are really cut off from the normal avenues of making it an American society. They can't get ahead as well as everyone else. They don't have the same avenues to get good jobs as other individuals. Now, organized crime serves as the first ladder on a very interesting way of getting out of the ghetto.
Francis Yanni has written extensively on organized crime and the origins of the mafia.
What did happen is that the Italians, the Sicilians, did bring with them this notion of banding together in families for protection.
For 1,000 years, Sicily was occupied by wave after wave of foreign invaders. To survive, the Sicilians formed underground movements to harass and fight their oppressors. Secrecy, cunning, and vengeance became almost a way of life. Sicily bred the mafia. In Sicilian villages, any festival is an occasion to celebrate the island's clannish, sometimes violent traditions. I am a Sicilian, says the storyteller. A man insulted my wife. He has to die. He embroiders a traditional tale of vengeance for a wrong done to the family.
This has developed also a very ritualistic code of justice. It's really a very strong sense of honor centered always in the family. It's most famous in Sicily as the vendetta, the idea that if someone injures someone in my family, I am required, I am bound to do something to some member of your family. And families have literally been wiped out down to males as young as 11 years of age as a result of this idea. In Sicily, when someone carries out a ritualistic murder of this sort, his notion is, it had to be done. I was merely the instrument of doing it. It had to be done because my family was insulted.
The caraccieri are a familiar sight at Sicilian festivals. Their hand-painted carts are covered with scenes of bloody conflict from the island's history. They celebrate violent resistance to unjust oppression. This tradition traveled with the emigrants to America. An influential member of the Californian Italian community describes the process.
Now, what happened when the immigration started? They landed in New York, New Orleans. Now, they were victim of the same oppression. They couldn't speak. They started being called Dago. They started giving the hardest jobs with a very little pay. Workers in the subways, if they marked it, what's your name? Lombardi, $2. What's your name? McAllister, $5. Same work, same place. And a little immigrant, he can't speak. He don't know the laws of the countries. You don't know where to go. He goes to some place and they look at it and says, well, it's a little Dago, leave him alone. So he goes to some friends who has a little power, who has a little knowledge, who hasn't been there before him. See, like in San Jose, see, the immigrants, they come to me, they come to an older immigrant who knows what's the Willow Glen produces. It's good for shrimp beans, it's good for this. Shall I buy away? He consults with someone of his own because he can trust it. So he goes to this man who has been there before him and he has a little bit of prestige. And he says, look what happened to me. What can I do? The man says, okay, we'll fix it. And they fix it. So, but the Irish had the same trouble. the people from Poland, they had more or less the same discrimination. But the reaction was different because they didn't have an experience to do it otherwise. This is the way they knew it. Fight in the street, bloody nose, end up in jail. The Sicilian don't want to end up in jail. They want to get away with it.
I've seen the mafia here. We've had it here. But to call them mafias, I wouldn't call them mafias, because right here in 1920, we had 325 crab boats, and they had an association, and these Sicilians all agreed with this association to go crabbing, which was our livelihood. And if the union said, unload 1 sack of crabs, that meant for everybody. But if some guy would unload 2 sacks in the night, and we found out about it, he didn't unload any more sacks. He was finished. And they'd have him floating down the river because they felt if there's a piece of bread, we're all gonna eat it. And now you ain't gonna eat the whole loaf. No way. And that's the way it went. I've seen many men stabbed in this locality. And this locality where we're taking this picture now was nothing but lumberyard and dumps. And I used to hunt birds there and so forth. And many times we'd go fishing with my father. It was on a Saturday or Sunday. And I would see a man laid in the street. Maybe he was stabbed to death, and my father would hit a sick kick in the rear, keep him moving. You didn't see nothing, you don't know nothing.
So they used the same method that they were using there, underground, and try to make it justice of their own. See what the regular expression was, take the law in their own hands.
Organized crime became automatically linked with Italians. The movies, the newspapers, the barroom jokes have hammered home the message. It was not always fair, but America was a promised land for crime as for everything else, and some Italians came well equipped to profit from it. But if they ever had a monopoly, it didn't last. By the time Las Vegas was a notorious mob haunt in the late 1940s, there were plenty of non-Italians who found that crime didn't pay forever. Las Vegas has become the gambling capital of the world.
9 and you win it.
Just as the Italians can't stop being identified with organized crime, neither can Las Vegas itself.
Drop the spot. Shoot it. Rolling.
People, as long as there are people, will always link Vegas or gambling with organized crime. And there is no way that you're going to tell them anything different. And I know what they're getting at. Have you seen any Italian hoods around? Was any of them around here? How did you get your job? I earned my job. I worked hard for my job. And I think I came a long way in the 10 years that I'm here. As far as organized crime or anything being in Las Vegas 20, 25 years ago, that was true. As far as today, if it is here, if in fact it is here, I have never seen it. There may be hotels in town that do accept it. I don't know. I have no way of knowing. I don't want to know. It's none of my business. I make a living. That's all I'm concerned with. I don't harm no one. I don't want no one to harm me. As far as an element being here, if it's here, fine. If it's not here, fine too. What annoys me is when anyone says organized crime or the word they use, mafia, right away there is an Italian name hung onto it. Okay, fine. There may be Italians involved in it, but I'm sure there's others involved. Why always they make out an Italian to be an animal? When it is someone says that to me, and they better have the door open when they say that to me. if they mean it, or even in jest, because I'm very proud of being an Italian, very proud of my heritage.
Let us not forget that the Italian American has been an asset to this country, that we built it with our backs brick by brick. We didn't steal it, we didn't burn it.
The Italians resent the view that other Americans have of them. They have formed anti-defamation leagues to guard their reputation. They've organized rallies demanding their acceptance as good Americans.
Boycott those who call us mafia. Hurt them in the pocketbook. On July 4th, we will buy no newspapers. And July 5th, we will buy no newspapers at all. We urge your support. That's what's wrong. Everybody who wants to use us for a tool, well, the comedian is done. The tool using is finished. And if you, the Italian Americans, do not band together and work for your Italian American brother, then you deserve what you get. You deserve to stay at the bottom of the totem pole. This is not an anti-American crowd. This is Italians wanting their place under the sun. That's all.